Any volunteers to read today?
Can I read, Prabhu?
Yes, Ruji.
Yeah. Prabhu, today, I think today is the 57th year, of Srila Prabhupada landing.
We are not able to hear you. Your voice is very faint.
Can you hear now?
Still faint.
Hare Krishna.
But are others able to hear him?
Hare
Yes,
Krishna.
Prabhu. Yes, Prabhu. We are able to hear, Prabhu.
I'm able to hear him, but your voice is much more louder and clearer, man.
It's a bit faint for me as well, Prabhu.
Pardon?
It sounds a little faint here as well.
Yeah. Hare Krishna. Is it okay now?
No, not yet.
No, I think then something is wrong with me, but I can hear all of you all very clearly. I think someone should read.
I can read, Prabhu, if Prabhuji is having the issues with this.
Okay. Go ahead, Mataji. Yeah,
Yes,
please go ahead.
Yes, Prabhuji. The next day, however, at 7 in the morning, she returned, eager for another chance to see him. She thought he had noticed her at the park and might remember her. She had made a drawing of him and she wanted to show him. That morning, as Prabhupada chanted prayers and led Kirtana, Linda didn't take her eyes off him. And when he asked everyone to chant Hare Krishna with him on beats, she excitedly accepted a strand from one of the devotees and tried to chant like him. Then he began reading the Sanskrit verse to begin his lecture, and Linda was captivated by the sound. If she were to continue with her graduate program in Greek, she would study Sanskrit next. So she listened with keen interest, proud that perhaps no one else in the room could understand as well as she. Later that same morning, she met Srila Prabhupada upstairs in his apartment. Linda. In the first conversation I had with him, Swamiji summed up Greek civilization for me in a couple of sentences. He explained that Srimad Bhagavatam was the source of stories like the Iliad and the Odyssey and was the source of Platonic philosophy. I was thrilled. Of course, I believed him. I knew that whatever he was speaking was the truth. There was no doubt in my mind, and he didn't discourage my love for Socrates. He told me that Socrates was actually a devotee in disguise. Then he began telling me the story of Krishna's the butter thief. And I said, "Oh, yes, I know that story. I saw a dance about Krishna as the butter thief." He was very pleased and he laughed. He said, "Oh, yes, you know, this encounter with Swamiji was like meeting an old friend because I felt completely at home and protected. And I felt I had found what I was looking for. Here, I could use my intelligence and ask the questions I had always wanted to ask in school." Prabhupada initiated Linda, giving her the name Leelavati. Seeing her eagerness to serve him personally, he decided to teach her to cook by having her prepare his lunch. He already had a little weekend cooking class in which he taught Janaki, Govindadasi, Nandarani, and others the art of cooking for Krishna. Now he invited Leelavati to come. He would walk back and forth in the small room, showing the girls how to knead dough, cook chapatis, measure spices in the right palm, and cut vegetables and cook them in ghee with masala. The foods were basic: rice, chapatis, cauliflower with potatoes, but he wanted to teach the girls precisely how to cook. Mukunda. One day, just out of curiosity, I went in to witness Swamiji's cooking classes. So I came in and stood at the doorway to Swamiji's kitchen. The women were there learning how to cook, and Swamiji said to me, "What are you doing?" "Oh," I said, "I just came to see my wife." Then Swamiji said, "Are you going back to Godhead or back to wife?" Everyone was amused, and I realized I wasn't welcome, so I left. The incident made me reflect on Swamiji's seriousness. For one thing, I learned that I should not be so attached to my wife. And secondly, I learned that his relationship with women and what he was teaching them was actually very sacred, not like the sometimes frivolous association between husband and wife. Because he spent many hours in the kitchen teaching them, they were very inspired. Tended to be proud. Many of the devotees were not college graduates, and none of them were classical scholars. She sometimes typed for Swamiji, did his wash, or brought flowers to his room in the morning, and he had quickly chosen her to be his exclusive cook. After only a few days of cooking lessons, Swamiji had told her, all right, you cook. And now he he came in only occasionally to check on her. Once, when he saw her rolling chapatis, he said, oh, you have learned very nicely. Preparing Swamiji's meals just right with the proper spicing without burning anything and on time was a challenge. By the time Leelavati finished, she would be perspiring and even crying from tension. But when she brought it his lunch, he would ask her to bring an empty plate and he would serve her portions from his own plate and invite her to eat with him. For the first few days, Lilavati made remarks about the wonderful taste of prasadam, and Swamiji would smile or raise his eyebrows. But then she noticed that he never spoke while eating, but seemed to be concentrating intensely as he sat, cross-legged, bending his body over the plate of prasadam and eating with his right hand. One day on Ekadashi, Lilavati arrived late at Swamiji's apartment, thinking there would not be much cooking on a fast day. But when she entered the kitchen, she found Swamiji himself busily cooking. He was heating something white in a skillet, vigorously stirring and scraping it from the bottom of the pan. Oh, he said, I was just wondering, where is that girl? Leelavati was too shy to ask what Swamiji was doing, so she simply busied herself cutting vegetables. Today is a fast day, she said, as if chiding Swamiji for cooking. You have to understand, he replied. In Krishna consciousness, a fast day means a feast day. We are offering this to Krishna. Leelavati continued to keep her distance from Swamiji's whitish, sticky looking preparation until he completed it and placed it on the windowsill to cool. Later it will harden, he said, and we can cut it and serve it. And with that he turned and walked out of the kitchen. When Leelavati finished cooking and served Swamiji his Ekadashi lunch, he asked her to bring him some of that thing on the windowsill. He took a bite, seemed pleased, and asked Leelavati to call Mukunda and Janaki to taste it. Janaki took a bite and exclaimed, it's wonderful, simply wonderful, incredible. What's this? Turning to Leelavati, Swamiji asked, what is in this preparation? I don't know, Swamiji, she said. Do you know? He replied. You were standing right by me in the kitchen and you don't remember? Leelavati's face turned red. Oh, Swamiji, Leelavati replied. I was very busy. I just didn't see. Oh, you are busy without intelligence? He replied. And he laughed for a long time until Mukunda was also laughing. Leelavati felt even more humiliated. Swamiji asked Janaki if she could tell what was in the preparation. She couldn't, except that it was a sweet. He then sent Leelavati downstairs to get Govinda Dasi and Gaurasundara. When they entered, Swamiji told Leelavati, go get some more for that simply wonderful thing. Again, this time in front of four devotees, Swamiji asked Leelavati, so what is this preparation? And again she defended herself. She had been too busy to notice. And again he laughed until everyone was laughing with him. He then asked Govinda Dasi to taste the simply wonderful and say what was in it. Immediately she guessed. sugar, butter, and powder milk. Oh, Swamiji looked at Leelavati. She's an artist. She's intelligent. So, to Leelavati, the whole episode was a devastating ordeal. Only later did she understand that Swamiji had been trying to teach her humility. Shall I continue, Prabhu?
Yes, Mataji. Yes, ma'am. Please continue. Please go. Yeah.
It was 7 a.m. Srila Prabhupada sat on his dais in the temple. Beside him, on an altar, stood the recently acquired statue of Krishna. The child Krishna stood 2 feet high, with his left hand on his hip and right hand holding a rod. Gurudasa had found him at an import store and had begged the manager to sell him. And after several visits, the man had agreed for $35. Prabhupada had given him the name Kartami Shai, the boss. This morning, as Prabhupada and Kartami Shai looked out at the devotees in the room, only about 6 people were present. The night before, the temple had been crowded. Where are the others? Prabhupada asked, and then he gave the answer himself. They are sleeping. All this sleeping is not good. He took out his kartalas and began playing the 1, 2, 3 rhythm. Mukunda took up a mridanga and played along, trying to execute the rhythms Srila Prabhupada had recently taught him. Srila Prabhupada had not even begun singing when the door opened and half a dozen barefoot hippies wandered in, reeking of marijuana. They glanced around, then sat down on the floor with the devotees as Prabhupada began singing Guruvashtakam, the Vaishnava prayers to the spiritual master. Although none of his disciples knew the words, they loved to listen to Swamiji sing these morning prayers. Unhurriedly, he sang each verse, several times repeating each line, deliberately developing the mood of unadulterated service to the spiritual master. Then one of the hippies, a boy with long, straight blonde hair and a red headband, began mumbling, fidgeting, and moaning. Someone softly asked him to be quiet. The boy paused but then moaned again. Swamiji and his followers were used to drug hippies who stayed up all night and came to the morning program, sometimes disrupting things. Usually, the visitors remained submissive, and even if they occasionally called out in a strange mood, they usually found peace in chanting Hare Krishna and would try to blend with the energy of the devotees. But today's discordant visitor seemed agitated by the chanting, as if it were challenging him. Rather, he sounded like he was challenging it. The devotees began clapping in time with Prabhupada's kartalas. And when Prabhupada began singing Hare Krishna, his half dozen followers immediately joined in, chanting both lead and chorus. Prabhupada looked at them gravely, encouraging the bedraggled early morning band of youngsters, and they responded determinedly. The guests sat in drugged contemplation, although one or two tried singing along. But the blond boy with the red headband remained adamantly disharmonious, moaning defiantly as if trying to throw off the effects of the chanting. Nonetheless, despite the boy's moaning, which was sometimes loud and savage, Prabhupada kept singing, and the devotees kept chanting. Mukunda and Hayagriva exchanged anxious glances, but tolerated the boy, unsure what else to do. Some of the devotees were disturbed and even frightened, but they had also heard Swamiji say in recent lectures that advanced devotees aren't shaken in any circumstances. Swamiji was their leader, not only in devotional prayers, but also in how to respond to this intruder. So they waited and watched him for a sign. Prabhupada remained undisturbed, but although after 20 minutes the kirtana was strong and determined, the blond boy's madness was not going away. As the chanting built up momentum, he became more agitated.
Mataji, can you just pause for a minute?
Yes.
Is Mataji audible to everyone?
Yes, Prabhu, very audible.
Okay. Fine. Just wanted, because there is some comment on the chat, so I was not sure what it meant. Okay, sure. Go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yes, Prabhu. Prabhupada remained undisturbed, but although after 20 minutes of Kirtana was strong and determined, the blond boy's madness was not going away. As the chanting built up momentum, he became more agitated. He screamed like a lost soul and hollered like a rock seeker. He was becoming more and more troubled and angry. When the devotees rose to their feet and began dancing, the boy began dancing too, but in his own way, crying and pounding his chest. Mukunda played louder on the drum. The sounds were discordant, a clash of individual madness and group chanting, until Prabhupada finally brought the Kirtana to a close. The devotees bowed their heads to the floor, and Srila Prabhupada intoned the Sanskrit prayers honoring the spiritual masters, the Supreme Lord, and the sacred places. All glories to the assembled devotees, he said. They responded, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Prabhupada said. And then he was, as was his morning custom, he announced, chant one round. Everyone sat down, including the crazy hippie. The devotees put aside the drums and karatalas, reached for their large red beads, and began chanting japa in unison. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Fingering one bead at a time, they uttered the mantra, then proceeded to the next bead. Surprised at this turn of events, the blond boy commented loudly, far out. As rapid chanting filled the room, the boy jumped to his feet and shouted, come with me. He whirled about, faced Srila Prabhupada and howled, I'm God. Then he began screaming loud berserk cries. Ahoo, wow. He sobbed, growled, grumbled, stomped his feet like a small child. He explored every sound in his voice could make, beating his fists on his chest again and again. He cried, I am God. And one of the boy's friends suddenly played a few notes on a panpipe. But Srila Prabhupada kept chanting japa, and the devotees also tried to continue chanting undaunted, while at the same time keeping an eye on the madman and wondering where it would all end. Then, with a final violent ejaculation, the boy shrieked, I am God, and in anger and disgust strode out of the room, slamming the door behind him, yelling as he ran down the street. The proper japa peacefully engulfed the storefront, and Srila Prabhupada's voice assumed its place more clearly above the voices of all the chanting devotees. After about 10 minutes of chanting, Prabhupada recited Sarvatmasnapanam Param Vijayate Sri Krishna Sankirtanam. Let there be all glory to the congregational chanting of Hare Krishna, which cleanses the dirt from the mirror of the mind and gives a taste of the nectar for which we are always hankering. As Prabhupada put on his spectacles and opened the Bhagavad Gita, he had been speaking each morning on the sixth chapter. The room settled and became silent for hearing his lecture. His students, some of whom had been imbibing his instructions for more than 2 months, listened attentively as he spoke the eternal Parampara message. It was Krishna's timeless message. Yet Swamiji was presenting it just for them as they sat on the rug early in the morning in the small storefront, 518 Frederick Street in Hyde Ashburn. Prabhupada lectured on the transmigration of the soul. Foolish people, he said, aspire for material acquisitions. They don't know that these things are finished with the death of the body. Spiritual life, however, is of the utmost importance because it is never lost. So even if Krishna consciousness becomes inconvenient or uncomfortable, one should never give it up. Srila Prabhupada was again stressing that the devotee is never disturbed, a point that seemed especially relevant in the wake of this morning's interruption. A devotee, Prabhupada explained, is always tolerant. Prabhupada told a story about the great devotee Haridas Thakura, a contemporary of Lord Chaitanya's, who endured severe beating at the hands of a Muslim magistrate. As Prabhupada told the story, he improvised dialogue. Oh, the magistrate said to Haridasa, you are born in such a nice family and you are chanting Hare Krishna? And then Prabhupada spoke for Haridasa. Sir, many Hindus also have become Mohammedan. So if some Mohammedan becomes Hindu, what is the harm? Prabhupada did change the pitch or accent of his voice while taking different parts of the dialogue. But with a subtle storyteller's art, each voice became a distinct person. The magistrate spoke threateningly. Oh, you are arguing? Then Prabhupada became the narrator. So it was decided that Haridasa was to be punished, give the dog a bad name and hang it. Then Prabhupada became Haridasa's floggers, who, despite repeatedly beating Haridasa, were unable to make him cry out in pain. Finally, exhausted, they spoke up. Sir, the idea was that you would die, but now we see that you do not die. So now punishment is awaiting us. Haridasa, what do you want? The floggers. We want that you should die, narrator. Then he played himself into samadhi, and the floggers brought him to the magistrate. The magistrate, throw him in the water. Don't put him in the graveyard. He has become Hindu. Srila Prabhupada concluded his tale. The others were flogging him, and he was chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. He was undisturbed. He was steady. Therefore, Lord Krishna says that a person who is spiritually advanced, for him there is no misery, even in this world, and what to speak of the other world. A devotee suffers no loss, Prabhupada explained. Even if he doesn't become perfectly Krishna conscious, or even if he falls away, his next birth also will be human. There was a prince. Prabhupada began a story to illustrate his point. His name was Satyavan, but he was to die at a certain age, his horoscope said. But one girl named Savitri, she fell in love with that boy. Now she wanted to marry. Her father told her, he'll die at a certain age. You don't marry. But she was bent. She married. In course of time, the boy died, say after 4 or 5 years, and the girl became widow. But she was so staunch lover that she won't let the dead body to go away. And the Yamaraja, the what is the English for one who takes away the body or the soul after death? So he came to take the soul away. So this chaste girl would not allow the husband's body to go away. By Prabhupada's voice and widening eyes, he appeared as Ramaraja, the Lord of Death. Speaking to the widow Savitri, it is my duty that I should take. You give it up. Otherwise, you will be also punished. The girl gave up her husband but followed behind Yamaraja. Then Prabhupada's Yamaraja, by a slight dropping of his voice, became compassionate. My dear girl, you go home. I give you benediction that you will have a son. Don't cry for your husband. But Savitri continued to follow Yamaraja. Yamaraja said, why are you following me? Then Prabhupada Savitri spoke, not in a feminine voice, but with the reasoning and heart of Savitri. Now you are taking my husband. How can I have my son? Prabhupada spoke as narrator. Oh, then he was in dilemma. He returned her husband. So, similarly, there is a technique. If you take to Krishna consciousness, then your husband or this human form of life is guaranteed. The devotees understood the gist of the story, but they weren't perfectly clear what their lives had to do with the woman in the story. Some, however, understood. If they took to Krishna consciousness, their ill-destined lives could become auspicious. Yes, Prabhupada continued. A spiritual life is the most auspicious life. He looked around emphatically at the devotees seated before him on the floor. Anyone who has done something nice, auspicious thing, oh, it will never be vanquished. He will never be put into difficulty. It is such a nice thing. He ended
Okay,
his letter.
Martin, you can just stop there for a minute,
Yes.
a few minutes. One is that we see how Prabhupada engaged Linda, who became Leelavati. So he knew that she was talented. He knew that she was qualified. So he properly engaged her, giving her giving due credit to her qualifications to engage them in Krishna's service. At the same time, he also cut down her pride. So Prabhupada did both things simultaneously. That's the beauty of a pure devotee, that he is trying to draw out the best in everyone for Krishna's service. At the same time, also trying to purify them, so what they're offering is not just their best, but is also pure. So that is what we have to understand, that we don't just offer what is the best we can do, but also we're interested in offering something pure to Krishna. So that is what Prabhupada did with Leelavati. And then we see how Prabhupada expertly handles the hippie who had gone berserk, and just the chanting alone, the process of Krishna consciousness alone defeated the hippie. Nobody had to do anything. Prabhupada speaking about Param Vijayate Sri Krishna Sankirtanam, right? And Prabhupada actually demonstrated it. Of course, in every situation we can't, Prabhupada, reacted differently in different circumstances, but here he particularly demonstrated that the holy name alone can do everything. So the mad hippie left by himself after Prabhupada began to chant the. Of course, he left before Prabhupada began to chant the holy names. Sorry, chant the Shikshashtakam. But the point is that the holy name had done its work. The holy name is Krishna himself. So when Krishna himself is present, nobody really needs to do anything else. But so whatever we are doing is for our benefit, for engaging us in service of the Lord. So Prabhupada demonstrated this by his chanting alone. This violent hippie, or not literally violent, but this dangerous looking hippie was removed from that whole assembly. And then Prabhupada speaks about the story of Haridas Thakur. It's very interesting that Prabhupada speaks about the story of Haridas Thakur, and he says this is the most intense form of suffering one can imagine, being beaten in 22 marketplaces with whips. And then Prabhupada concludes this section by saying that anyone who has done some nice, auspicious thing, oh, it will never be vanquished. He will never be put into difficulty. All this is right after telling the story of Haridas Thakur, Savitri, and Prabhupada saying you will never be put into difficulty. It is such a nice thing. Now, so what do we understand from there? Because Prabhupada explains there that the others, like for example, he speaks about Haridas Thakur. He says the others were flogging him, and he was chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. He was undisturbed. He was steady. Therefore, Lord Krishna says that a person who is spiritually advanced, for whom there is no misery, even in this world. What to speak of the other world? But even in this world, Haridas Thakur did not experience misery. That is what is being said. Of course, we know from the past time that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu personally came and took the beating, just to demonstrate that the Lord takes care of his devotees. And then Prabhupada speaks about the story of Savitri, how she was determined. And because of her determination, she succeeded. So similarly, if you're just determined to practice Krishna consciousness, we will succeed. So that's the whole point, that nobody and no one can pose an obstacle in the practice of Krishna consciousness. Okay, Manji, please go ahead.
He ended his lecture and asked the questions. A young woman raised her hand. You say that people foolishly worship the photograph of someone who has already gone. You gave the example of George Washington or Gandhi. But can't the photo of a spiritual teacher be very helpful to teach others to love him? Prabhupada. Yes, those who are spiritually advanced, they are not different from their photograph. Just like here is the statue of Krishna. He is not different from Krishna. The original person, Krishna, and his statue of Krishna are the same. Just like we are chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna and the name of Krishna are non-different. Do you realize it? If we are not getting some spiritual enlightenment by chanting Hare Krishna, then do you think we are simply wasting our time? No, we are not wasting our time. We are actually getting spiritual ecstasy because there is no difference. Similarly, a spiritually perfect person and his photograph is the same because it is in the absolute stage. Is that clear? Govinda Dasi raised her hand. You said that after leaving this body, a person in Krishna consciousness goes to a higher planet. Excuse me. Prabhupada. No, if you make perfection of Krishna consciousness, then after leaving this body, you go directly to Krishna. But if you are not perfect, if you have simply executed a certain percentage only, then you will get the chance of another human body. But one who has understood what is Krishna, how Krishna takes his birth, how Krishna acts, he doesn't get any more material birth. Then where does he go? Tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mameti. He comes to me. That means in the supreme abode of Krishna. Therefore, we should be very serious. Why should we wait for another birth, either in very pious family or rich family or in other planet? This human body can give you the highest perfection, but we have to be very serious and try for that perfection. But we are not serious. We are not very serious. Actually, human civilization means that people should be very serious to have perfection of this human body. That is perfect human civilization that is missing at the present moment. Srila Prabhupada sat in silence for several minutes, not moving. No one in the audience made a sound. Finally, he reached over for his kartalas and began loudly ringing them together and singing Govinda Jaya Jaya Gopala Jaya Jaya, and the devotees joined him. Govinda Jaya Jaya Gopala Jaya Jaya Radharam Hari Govinda Jaya Jaya. It was Prabhupada's desire to see his disciples raise their Krishna consciousness to 100% in their present lifetime. They could do it too because the chanting was absolutely potent. If there was something they didn't understand, he would explain it. Govinda Dasi hadn't understood. She had thought that a devotee was meant to go to a higher planet, but now she understood. And he had told them to become more serious. He knew they sometimes went to the donut shop and even smoked cigarettes after kirtanas, and he tolerated it. But he let them know that he really wanted them to be completely serious. Unless they were completely serious, they might have to go to a higher planet within the material universe. And what good was that? To raise to a human birth took many lifetimes. Human life was meant for perfection. So they should be serious. But he said that we are not serious. After the Kirtana, Srila Prabhupada left the storefront and returned to his apartment. Hayagriva, turning to Haridasa, asked why no one had thrown the crazy boy out. In New York, Hayagriva said Brahmananda would have removed him at the first outburst. You have to be careful with the hippies here, Haridasa explained. Tactful is the word. In this neighborhood, if someone walks around high on LSD, people automatically assume that he is due all the respect of God and should be tolerated. They come in and jump up and down and scream, but we can't lay a hand on them because they are LSD saints. If we had touched that boy this morning, the whole neighborhood would be down on us. The diggers next door are pretty noisy, but they unplug their jukebox during lectures, and they have been very friendly, giving us clothing and helping us decorate the temple. Sometimes the Hells Angels go over there and raise a lot of noise, and sometimes they even come in here. If they do, best to humor them. They are always trouble. That very morning, some Hells Angels started a fight in the digger's store. The devotees could hear thuds and screams through the walls as a big black beat up three Hells Angels. The brawl ended only after a police car and an ambulance arrived. Afterwards, about a dozen people drifted into the temple, talking about the brawl. Harsharani put out extra plates for the guests. One day in March, 18-year-old Vaine Gunderson was walking down the street when a piece of paper blowing along the sidewalk caught on his foot. He tried to kick it off without breaking his stride, but it hung on. Then he stopped and tried to kick it off. He couldn't. He reached down and picked it off and found that it was a flyer, Stay High Forever, advertising lectures by Swami Bhaktivedanta at 518 Frederick Street. Like so many others, Viney, a mild-mannered
Vain, it's vain.
Wayne, Wayne, a mild-mannered young man who worked for the post office, had come to Hyde Ashbury to take part in the revolution. He attended rock concerts and beans, browsed through the books and posters in the psychedelic shops, shared an apartment with his girlfriend and another couple, and took drugs. But he was quiet, polite, and solitary. He didn't dress like a hippie but wore clean, conservative, casual clothes and a whimsical, odd-looking sports cap. The flyer about the Swami seemed a timely coincidence because had been planning to go to India to find a guru. He decided to go see Swami Bhaktivedanta on Frederick Street. Wayne was surprised to find only a storefront. He was startled by the picture of the Swami in the window. No smiling, bearded yogi, but a shaven headed Swami with a stern look. Wayne went in. It was a typical Haight Ashbury scene, with hippies sitting around. But there were also a few people with big red beads strung like garlands around their necks. And up front, he saw the Swami. Wayne was impressed as Prabhupada began chanting Hare Krishna, and he found the lecture firm and authoritative. The Swami stressed, "We are not these bodies." And when he spoke of Krishna, he described Krishna so personally that it was like being introduced to Krishna. After a few meetings, Wayne got up the nerve to ask a question. Can one practice Hatha Yoga at the same time as Krishna consciousness? Oh, why do you want to spend so much time with that body? Prabhupada replied. And Wayne left Prabhupada's eyes look deep within him. Sorry, and Wayne felt Prabhupada's eyes look deep within him. You are not that body. He said it so strongly that Wayne, who was easily hurt, felt like shrinking into the floor. This body is not as important as the soul. Srila Prabhupada explained. So we shouldn't spend so much time with the body, exaggerating its needs. Then he smiled at Wayne. Besides, all yogas culminate in Krishna consciousness. And Wayne felt that smile lift him completely out of his diminished and crushed condition. Several weeks later, Wayne asked about initiation. When the devotees told him he should go up and see the Swami, Wayne went home and rehearsed his lines first. Anticipating what Prabhupada would say, Wayne prepared his own responses and contrived the whole conversation. Then nervously, he approached Prabhupada's door. But before he could even knock, the door opened, and there was Prabhupada looking at him, not sternly, as in his picture, but kindly, as if expecting him. Yes, Prabhupada said, come in. The incident completely shattered Wayne's planned approach. He concluded that Swamiji could read minds. So, trying to clear his mind of bad thoughts, he entered Prabhupada's apartment. Prabhupada sat in his rocking chair, and Wayne, who usually sat on the floor, sat in the only other chair in the room. Wayne immediately felt uncomfortable as he realized that it would be more proper to sit at Prabhupada's feet. But feeling too weak hearted to alter the situation, he kept his seat, nervously fingering his sports cap. Swamiji, he began, I would like to be your disciple. Prabhupada immediately agreed. He asked whether Wayne could follow the four principles, and Wayne, although not even sure what the four principles were, said he could. Prabhupada then asked him what principle was the most difficult for him to follow. Well, he said, I have difficulty with meat eating. A lie. He was a vegetarian, but he was too shy to say that his real problem was uncontrolled sexual desire. Prabhupada laughed. Oh, that's no problem. We will give you prasadam. You can be initiated next week. Wayne then asked if he would be able to go to India. He felt the Swami would be pleased to hear that his new follower wanted to go to his country. But Prabhupada seemed displeased. India? Why India? Wayne thought. The real reason he had wanted to go to India was to find a guru. Well, he said, to learn Sanskrit. I will teach you Sanskrit, Prabhupada replied. So there was no need to go to India, and he would be initiated by a genuine guru next week, right here in San Francisco. Some devotees helped Wayne prepare for his initiation ceremony. Hayagriva lent Wayne his dhoti, a piece of yellow cloth much too large for Wayne. Devotees set up a sacrificial arena in the
Set up. Devotee set up.
Devotees set up a sacrificial arena in the storefront, a bed of earth, firewood, colored dyes, flowers. During the ceremony, Wayne was nervous. When Prabhupada chanted the mantras, Wayne could not hear them exactly. So he just mimicked as best he could. And when Prabhupada began the fire sacrifice, Wayne felt a little frightened because the initiation seemed such a serious commitment. He watched Prabhupada gravely building the fire and saying the mantras. When Prabhupada initiated Wayne with his new name Upendra, Wayne didn't hear it clearly and began to worry. Then the ceremony ended, and Prabhupada stood up and abruptly left the storefront. Upendra. Someone reminded me that I should go upstairs and give Swamiji an offering. So I decided to give him a baby blanket and a beach towel. It wasn't that I lacked money, but these things had some sentimental value to me. So I wanted to give them to Swamiji. I went upstairs to his room, and he was sitting at the foot of his mattress. I came in and bowed down and presented him with the baby blanket and beach towel. He held them up in his fingers and looked at them both in each of his hands. He said, these things are useless, and he tossed them down on the floor. I was hurt and had nothing to say. I just sat there. After a while, I excused myself and went back to my apartment. The next day, I went to see Swamiji during his evening visiting time, and he had the beach towel and baby blanket out on the floor like rugs so that his guests who came to visit could have something to sit on. I felt satisfaction that he had found some use of my offerings. Prabhupada said,
Yeah, Bhadri, can you just stop there
Yes,
for a minute?
yes.
Okay. Now, one thing that we see here in Prabhupada's dealing with Upendra is that when he offers him this baby blanket and beach towel, Prabhupada actually calls it useless because it is not of practical use to him. But Prabhupada also simultaneously he recognizes the point of view with which Upendra Prabhu gave it to him, because it was important to him, although it was sentimental. So because it was sentimental and because it's practically of not much use, but Prabhupada, he respected the mood in which it was given, because it has some value, even if sentimental. Still, he wanted to offer something of value to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada, although objectively speaking, it was not of value, but he valued the devotional mood in which it was offered to Prabhupada. So he made use of it. This is a pure devotee. That if there is any chance for connecting a soul to Krishna, any chance whatsoever, Prabhupada would go for it, and he would do it. So that's typical characteristic signature Prabhupada, as they would say. He would never reject anything. Somehow or the other, he would find some use for everything. And also, one thing that Prabhupada did, if we notice during these pages, not just today, but generally when we read the Leelamrita, one thing we noticed was Prabhupada actually went ahead and initiated people who expressed some sincerity. He didn't see whether they were already following or not. Just the willingness to follow, Prabhupada is willing to accept. Of course, later on he introduced stricter standards, but we can see here that all that is needed at that time was that willingness to become Prabhupada's disciple. Prabhupada accepted that as the criteria to initiate disciples. Okay, please go ahead, Master.
Prabhupada said that Upendra was not living up to his vows, since he was still living with his girlfriend. Upendra felt guilty about breaking the principles forbidding illicit sex and intoxication, but he just couldn't follow them. He wanted to tell Swamiji, but couldn't bring himself to do it. Besides, he thought, even if he confessed, how could he stop? Upendra's girlfriend didn't like Krishna consciousness, didn't want to meet Swamiji, and didn't want to come to the temple. So Prabhupada decided that instead of marrying Upendra to her, he would save Upendra from her. Prabhupada decided to make Upendra a brahmachari. Although Srila Prabhupada had about 25 San Francisco disciples, hardly any were brahmacharis. Practically, the only solid one was Jayananda, who was a little older than the rest. Jayananda worked all day driving a cab, chanting Hare Krishna even while driving. And when he was off work, he would be at the temple cooking or doing any service he could find, or sitting with Prabhupada in his apartment with the other devotees. He was known for his serious japa. Sitting cross-legged, eyes squeezed tightly shut, he would hold his strand of beads up in both hands and rock forward almost to the floor and back, chanting intensely, oblivious to the outside world. He was serious, and that was the only way one could remain a brahmachari. In New York, Prabhupada had about a dozen brahmacharis, but a more permissive attitude among his followers in San Francisco made brahmachari life more difficult. In the original Vedic society of ancient India, brahmachari life began at the age of 5. Parents would send their son to live with the guru at the Gurukula, where the boy would receive basic education, spiritual instruction, and strict moral discipline under the guru. Even Lord Krishna, in his transcendental pastimes on earth, had attended a Gurukula and very humbly served his spiritual master. The basic principle of brahmachari life was celibacy. By practicing celibacy, the brahmachari would develop great powers of memory and sensory control. And if such a trained brahmachari later decided to take a wife, his sex life would be regulated, not licentious. But although brahmachari life was necessary for a healthy society, Prabhupada had seen within his own lifetime the rapid deterioration of brahmacharya almost to non-existence. And in America, the situation was of course much worse. Srimad Bhagavatam tells of a young Brahmana, Ajamila, who fell from spiritual life because he had seen a drunken man embracing a half-naked prostitute. In America, to see a half-naked prostitute in public was not uncommon. As soon as a brahmachari walked out on the street, he would confront so many allurements. But Prabhupada was convinced that brahmacharis could protect themselves even in America if they regularly chanted Hare Krishna and sincerely tried to follow the rules and regulations. Krishna would protect them. Prabhupada had decided to ask Upendra to come and live with him as his personal servant. Prabhupada's former servant, Ranchora, had recently left his position. Although supposedly a brahmachari, he had never been a serious brahmachari. He had even seduced one of the young women devotees in New York. Prabhupada had found out and had asked the girl why she had indulged in sex with Ranchora if she wasn't planning to marry him. Prabhupada's why had so disarmed the girl that she had been unable to answer. Prabhupada had admonished her, "You girls should not make yourselves so cheap," and had given Ranchora another chance. But Ranchora never became serious. After playing the drums during the big kirtana at the Avalon Ballroom, Ranchora had become fascinated with the dance hall. He would sneak out from his service, lie to Prabhupada about his absence, and go looking for girls at the Avalon. One day he never returned. As one of the devotees reported to Prabhupada, he just disappeared into the strobe lights. Ranchora did come back once to ask Prabhupada for money so that he could return to his home in New York. Upendra, despite his weaknesses, was spontaneously attracted to Prabhupada and liked to be with him whenever he could. Sometimes Upendra would go up to the apartment with one or two other devotees and just sit in front of Prabhupada as Prabhupada sat on the thin pillow behind his low desk. Sometimes Prabhupada would continue reading or writing, and Upendra would sit and bask in his presence, simply watching him work. After 10 minutes or so, Prabhupada would look up and say, "All right, that's enough." And the boys would go and leave. Prabhupada would also go to see Prabhupada taking his lunch, and Prabhupada would take some rice and vegetables from his plate, put them on a chapati, and offer them to Upendra. Although the prasadam was similar to the prasadam the devotees ate downstairs, Upendra thought that it tasted much better. One day, when Upendra was alone with Prabhupada in his room, Prabhupada asked, "You are living with a young girl and people who are intoxicants." For the second time, Upendra was convinced that Swamiji could read his mind and knew his entire life. "Yes," Upendra admitted, "but I'm not having," Prabhupada interrupted. "That's not good. Swamiji, I'm not having any sexual connections. Where, where there is a boy and where there is a girl," Prabhupada said, "there is sex. You must come and live with me." Upendra was delighted. "Yes, I'll come immediately." He took a few belongings from his apartment, left everything else with his girlfriend, and moved into the front room of Prabhupada's apartment. He was now Swamiji's personal servant. Prabhupada requested him to keep his job at the post office. Around midnight, as soon as Upendra got off work, he would return to the apartment. Prabhupada always left the door unlocked for him. Usually, soon after Upendra locked the door, crawled into his sleeping bag, and fell asleep, he would be awakened by Prabhupada speaking into his dictating machine, composing teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Upendra would nod off again and sleep until 6. Upendra relished this close association with his spiritual master and became always cheerful. I just want to be Swamiji's dog, he would often tell the other devotees. One time, Upendra was reading to himself from Srimad Bhagavatam. The whole subject matter is so presented through the lips of Srila Sukadeva Goswami that any sincere audience who will lend his ears submissively to this message of the transcendental world will at once relish the transcendental mellows distinguished from the perverted mellows of the material world. The ripened fruit is not dropped all of a sudden from the highest planet of Krishna Loka, but it has come down carefully, being handled by the chain of disciplic succession without any change or disturbance in the formation of the soft and ripened fruit. You don't have any questions? Prabhupada asked. Upendra looked up from the book. No, Swamiji, I accept everything you say. Prabhupada began rocking strongly in his rocking chair and smiled as Upendra kept reading. Then Prabhupada taught Upendra the proper way to hold a book while reading, with the palms of both hands up and off the lap. This advice gave Upendra greater enthusiasm to please his spiritual master by reading his books. Upendra was still bothered by sexual desires. He thought that maybe he should get married, but he was confused about what a Krishna conscious marriage was supposed to be. How could you be married? He puzzled. If you don't love the girl you want to marry, and how could you love her without having sex with her? He wanted to ask Swamiji about this, but he kept it to himself, waiting for an opportunity and for the courage. Then one day he entered Prabhupada's room as Prabhupada paced back and forth from one end of the room with its three large bay windows overlooking Frederick Street to the other end where his rocking chair sat. Now Upendra decided he should ask his question. Swamiji, he began, may I ask a question? Yes, Prabhupada replied, stopping his pacing. If a boy is separate from a girl, then how can he learn to love her? Prabhupada began to walk back and forth again, chanting on his beats. After a moment, he turned and said softly, Love? Love is for Krishna. And he walked toward the window and looked down at the street below. You want a girl? Pick one. He pointed toward some women passing on the street. There is no love in this material world. He said, Love is for Krishna. Gradually, under Srila Prabhupada's pure influence, Upendra began to feel less agitated by sexual demands. He came to understand that he was not a material body but a spiritual soul, that the soul's eternal nature was to love Krishna, and that for a pure devotee, for Swamiji, love was for Krishna. More and more, Upendra just wanted to be the servant of Swamiji. He thought of what foods to buy for him and how to make things comfortable for him. It was in this mood of wanting to serve Swamiji that Upendra visited the psychedelic shop one day. He had heard they had recently received some prints from India. So he went in and browsed through the prints, picked out some pictures of Lord Krishna and took them to Swamiji. In Prabhupada's room, along with other devotees, Upendra unrolled the prints one by one on Prabhupada's desk, waiting to see Prabhupada's response. As Upendra watched, it seemed to him that Swamiji was looking at photos of his personal friend. He was pleased with the pictures. Hayagriva commented that the religious art of the Indian prince was a bit garish, but Prabhupada explained that the technique didn't matter. The important thing was that the pictures were of Krishna and were executed according to Vedic descriptions. For the devotee, they were beautiful. They were non-different from Krishna. Prabhupada selected as his favorite picture of Lord Krishna standing and playing his flute in the moonlight and the river Yamuna flowing by. In this picture, Krishna was known as Govinda. Prabhupada held the picture up and quoted a verse. Smeram bhangitraya parichitam sachi vistirna drishtim vamshinyastadhara kishalayam ujjwalam chandrakena govindakhyam haritanum itah keshi tirthopakanthe ma प्रेक्षिष्ठास्तव यदि सखे बंधु संगेस्ति रंगः. He then took a sheet of paper and began writing, while the devotees watched him intently, listening to the scratching of the pen on the page. Then he read aloud, "My dear friend, if you still have an inclination to enjoy material life, society, friendship, and love, then please do not see the boy named Govinda, who is standing in a three-curved way, smiling and skillfully playing on his flute, his lips brightened by the full moonshine. Yamuna, you can write this nicely?" Prabhupada knew that Yamuna was trained calligrapher. He asked her to print the verse and display it, along with the picture, by his sitting place in the temple. He wanted to be able to look at it during kirtanas. Upendra thought and prayed, "If I can just fix myself steadily in serving Swamiji, who has such love for Krishna, then I too will become transcendental." He felt that since it was not possible for him to see Govinda the way Swamiji saw him, he should serve Swamiji, the pure devotee of Govinda, and in that way become pure. I just want to become Swamiji's dog, Upendra said as he left the apartment.
Now, one powerful thing that we can notice here is that we saw from the beginning that Upendra is mentioned that he had uncontrolled sexual desires. Everybody has sexual desires, but then this was uncontrolled. And being in the association of Srila Prabhupada, he was able to bring it under control. That is the power of a pure devotee. It is not possible by the association of yogis or any material techniques or yoga. Everything would fail. But the power of association of a pure devotee can dramatically, can create a 180-degree reversal in the direction in which one is going. So Upendra's meeting Prabhupada created that 180-degree reversal in the direction in which he was going. So in the next section, we still have time. So next section, we'll see Mr. Price is returning. So we'll see some very interesting things happening here. The way Prabhupada deals with the whole thing. Please go ahead, Masih.
In New York, the boys had their orders from Prabhupada not to give any money to Mr. Price unless there was a purchase contract. Prabhupada still wanted the building. He had written to Brahmananda on March 4. "I hope when I go to New York next, I shall enter the new house forthwith." And he had written Rayarama on March 7. "I am very glad to learn that Brahmananda, yourself, and all others have the transcendental courage to take all risks for Krishna, and this act will enhance your glory in Krishna consciousness." But he wanted them not to be cheated by false promises. Meanwhile, Mr. Price was asking the devotees to turn over $5,000 to his financial friend, Mr. Hall, who would then add $20,000 and make the down payment to the owner, Mr. Tyler. Mr. Price wanted Brahmananda to get the point across to His Excellency that negotiations had to be done in this fashion and right away if they seriously wanted to get the house. Brahmananda wrote to Prabhupada asking him to advise the bank to transfer $5,000 into the account controlled by the boys, the trustees of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Prabhupada gave permission and asked that The check be signed by the president and secretary because Brahmananda and Satsvarupa are the main support for purchasing this house. And Kirtanananda is a supplement to this from his kitchen department. But he said that the check should be made to the seller, Mr. Taylor, not to the financier, Mr. Hall. The money and the society is yours. Srila Prabhupada acknowledged. You can spend in any way, but it is my duty to give you advice as ever well-wisher. Then Mr. Price invited Brahmananda to Mr. Hall and to meet Mr. Hall. And he suggested that Brahmananda come prepared with a check for $5,000. On the way, Mr. Price explained that Mr. Hall was perhaps the biggest real estate dealer in Manhattan, a multimillionaire. He owned skyscrapers. Everything he owned was big. When Brahmananda entered Mr. Hall's office, he thought it was right out of a Hollywood movie, a conference room 10 times bigger than a Second Avenue temple room. And seated at the head of the large oval table was Mr. Hall himself. The room was in semi-darkness, with a few spotlights on Mr. Hall, who sat before a battery of telephones. Even as they began to discuss, Mr. Hall paused several times, picking up phones and talking to persons in various places across the country. Young man, Mr. Hall said to Brahmananda, we are helping you get the house. It's a beautiful house, a New York City landmark. Then Mr. Hall's girlfriend called from a boat in the Caribbean. He talked to her for a while and then returned to Brahmananda and Mr. Price, who sat in the shadows at his conference table. Mr. Hall had a big contract he wanted Brahmananda to sign. Brahmananda knew that Swamiji wanted a contract, and here it was. He also knew that if he signed over the $5,000, he would have no other money and no extra income. And he knew that they knew it, but Swamiji wanted the building. Swamiji himself had looked at $100,000 building and had offered to buy them, even though he had very little money to back his offers up. And Brahmananda always did whatever Swamiji said. To sign this contract, Brahmananda concluded, was an act of faith in Swamiji and Krishna. He didn't analytically ask, where will the rest of the money come from? To do so, he thought, would be like doubting Swamiji. So here he was in this big-time financiers office. It was awesome. The millionaires were going to help. Mr. Price was at Brahmananda's elbow. Mr. Hall was telling Brahmananda that everything was all right. We are going to get you this house. Now it was actually going to happen. Here was one of the biggest men in Manhattan offering to help. And whereas Brahmananda had no money, Mr. Hall would be able to pick up the place very easily from the owner. Glancing quickly over the contract, Brahmananda signed. It was a deal, and he gave them the check for $5,000. As soon as Brahmananda and Mr. Price left Mr. Hall's office, there was a distinct change in Mr. Price. Although still acting as Brahmananda's friend, he now said, Gee, now you have to get this money. As they walked together on the uptown street, Mr. Price cheerfully pushed the whole thing onto Brahmananda. That was the change. Before, Mr. Price had been saying that he and Mr. Ball were going to do it, but now he said that it was all up to the devotees. Brahmananda asked about the legal position. Mr. Price explained that only the Krishna Society was bound. But what about the promises? What about Mr. Hall's being so rich and wanting to help them, and Mr. Price's wanting to help? Mr. Price assured Brahmananda that he and Mr. Hall did want to help. They were doing everything they could, but Brahmananda and the other devotees should also do everything they could and come up with the $20,000 to complete the down payment by the end of the month. And what if they couldn't? Mr. Price made it very clear. If they don't pay the balance in a month, then they lose your deposit. By the time Brahmananda reached 22nd, 6th, 2nd Avenue, he realized he had been cheated. He was crushed. He returned to the other devotees and told them what had happened. But they could only return. Why did you do it? Brahmananda phoned Srila Prabhupada in San Francisco. Now that his eyes had been opened about Mr. Price, Brahmananda was blunt about his mistake. And he told Prabhupada that he had given away the $5,000. All of it is gone? Srila Prabhupada asked. Yeah, Brahmananda replied. He heard Prabhupada hang up the phone. Brahmananda had been about to explain the whole thing, but Swamiji had just hung up without a word. Brahmananda placed the receiver back on the hook. He was shaken. The next day, the trustees held a special meeting. The boys sat around in the front room of Srila Prabhupada's apartment trying to decide what to do. Gargamuni again called Prabhupada, who advised them to stop the check at the bank. Swamiji is as smart as a fox, Raya Rama smiled. Gargamuni phoned the bank, but it was too late. The check had already been cashed. They consulted Mr. Goldsmith, their friendly lawyer. He said it sounded like a weak legal case. Price and Hall hadn't legally bound themselves to pay anything if the devotees failed to pay. And if the devotees couldn't pay the $20,000 balance by the end of the month, they would lose their $5,000 deposit. They could sue for fraud, but court fees would be costly. Then, one by one, Mananda, Satswarupa, Kirtanananda, Rayarama, Gargamuni, and the others began to look at the letters from Prabhupada and discuss how he had warned them to avoid being cheated. Their greatest blunder, they began to realize, was disobeying his instructions. He had told them not to trust the promises of these businessmen, and he had told them that the check should be made only to the owner, not to the financier. Within a few days, further instructions from their spiritual master came in the mail. There were admonishments, but hearing from him, even if he was chastising them, was better than the pain of his hanging up the phone without a word. But you have not followed my instructions, and now you are in trouble, he wrote to the boys. He wrote Rayarama. You are all foolish boys. I repeatedly warned you, even at the last point, that we should not pay the check unless there was agreement between Mr. Taylor and Mr. Hall. The agreement was signed like a marriage ceremony without the presence of the bridegroom. The mistake was there, and now you are repenting. To Satsarupa Hero. You have asked me whether the San Francisco branch will pay some money for purchasing the house. But where is your house? Where is the purchase? So far, it is talks of Mr. Price and company in which you innocent boys have been entrapped. I do not know how I can help you in your great blunder. I can only hope that Krishna will help you. Unlike the boys and their lawyers, Prabhupada thought that the legal case against the businessmen would be a strong one. I am not a lawyer, but this is common sense affair. Mr. Hall has taken the money and he must finance to purchase the house. If he has no money to finance, then it is a cheating case, clear and simple. The culprits, he said, should be brought to criminal court. Their conspiracy and fraud were obvious and could be proven. From the telephonic conversation of Brahmananda, it appears to be an organized cheating case, and you have to face with courage without excusing any one of them. We are not revengeful, but we cannot lose Krishna's money for nothing. The boys had already blundered so much that Prabhupada doubted whether they could tackle the cheaters. But he said they had to try. Let us have the house or return back the money. In default, there is clear case of cheating. Now you can do as you like. Srila Prabhupada wrote the boy's lawyer relating the history of the case. He also wrote a letter to the financier, the owner, and Mr. Price, threatening to expose everything, including what he alone had seen, that the lawyers involved were also implicated. Brahmananda could barely understand what was going on, but it appeared that Swamiji was going to get results. The boys were fools, certainly, but the businessmen were certainly cheaters, and Swamiji claimed that he could prove it in court, while admonishing his blundering disciples and going fiercely after the cheaters. Srila Prabhupada still remained the ultimate shelter for his foolish boys. In a letter to the 6 trustees of his New York branch, he shed transcendental light into their gloomy minds. Forget the chapter. Take it for granted that Krishna has taken away this money from you for your deliberate foolishness. In future, be very cautious and abide by the orders of Krishna. If you abide by the orders of Krishna, he can give you things that you may need. Be cheerful and chant Hare Krishna without any lamentation. As I have told you several times, that my Guru Maharaja used to say that this world is not a fit place for gentlemen. His version is corroborated by the following verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. It is said like, Yasya asti bhagavati akinchana bhakti sarvai gunais tatra samasatte sura harau abhaktasya kuto mahat guna manorathen asato dhavato bahi. A person who is not in Krishna consciousness has no good qualifications. However, so-called gentleman, one may be or academically educated, he is hovering over the mental plane, and therefore he must commit nuisance being influenced by the external energy. A person who has, however, unflinching faith in the Supreme Personality of Godhead has all the good qualifications of the demigods. In other words, you should not keep your trust on so-called gentlemen of the world, however nicely dressed he may be. In the matter of discharging our mission of Krishna consciousness, we have to meet so many so-called gentlemen, but we must be very cautious for dealing with them as we are cautious in dealing with serpents. Now, more than ever, the boys in New York wanted Swamiji to come back. Although most of the talk in the temple was still about real estate, they were holding regular kirtana and lecture programs, and two new boys had joined. Jadurani had finished some new paintings of Lord Vishnu, which now hung in the temple, and she was waiting anxiously for Swamiji to come and see them. Some devotees had made a new speaker's seat in the temple for Swamiji. They knew they were fools, but they asked him please to come back. He agreed. He set April 9 as the date for his return to New York. But meanwhile, he still had much to do in San Francisco.
One thing that we notice in this whole price affair is that a pure devotee knows how to handle the material energy in Krishna's service. Sometimes we may think, not we, I mean, sometimes some devotees may think that a pure devotee has come to teach us spiritual lessons. So how he deals with the material energy is not something that he has come to teach. But for a pure devotee, there's no such thing as spiritual and material. He sees everything as Krishna's energy. So he is in perfect knowledge, and he knows how to engage something in Krishna's service. Then we could say, okay, but Prabhupada was not a scientist, but Prabhupada knew how to engage the scientist in Krishna's service. You know, so he knows the art of engaging material energy, of transforming material energy into the service of the Lord. Because for the pure devotee, there's no such thing as material. Of course, he sees there's a difference in the nature of the two energies, the internal and the external energy. But he sees everything as Krishna manifestation, as emanating from Krishna. So he sees both material energy and spiritual energy and external energy and internal energy as sacred. And he knows how to deal with Krishna's energy. He is not ignorant of how to deal with Krishna's energy. he knows how to. So as I was saying, somebody may say, oh, he did not know physics. So what? But he knew how to engage physicists in the service of Krishna. So that is the point, that he does not have to know like how Krishna knows in terms of, he's not omniscient like Krishna to know the details of the material energy, but he definitely knows how to engage the material energy in Krishna's service. Given any circumstance, he would know how to engage the material energy in Krishna's service. So that's we see here how he was very clear about how Krishna's money could be prevented from being lost. Look, money is Krishna's energy, and a pure devotee knows how to prevent his money, Krishna's money, being lost. Okay, we actually today interestingly we are stopping exactly at the 5 o'clock mark in Indian Standard Time. Any thoughts, reflections, comments on this? We went through a whole varying types of flavors in this reading today. There are so many different things different flavors that appeared in today's reading. So any thoughts, any comments, any reflections, any questions? Prabhupada also interestingly tells here in this letter, do not be overcome by lamentation. Although it is such a big blunder, Prabhupada wants us, whenever we make a blunder, to learn from the blunder and go on with Krishna consciousness. You know? As Prabhupada used to say, he's often used expressions like progressive march of Krishna consciousness. You know? He uses that expression in some letters. So, because lamentation means it's a quality of tamoguna, whereas knowledge means because I was foolish, I lost this money. Okay, I should no more be foolish, which means I should engage in service of Krishna. I should more seriously engage in service of Krishna, not get into further foolishness by lamentation. Already one foolishness has been committed. The second foolishness would be to get into lamentation.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes, my Prabhu.
Thank you. It was a beautiful session today with lots to learn from how Prabhupada deals with these situations. It was quite eye-opening. So, yeah. I have just a general question. Earlier on, we read when Prabhupada was teaching, I think it was Linda Mataji, I can't remember which Mataji he was teaching in the kitchen, but he mentioned that it was Ekadashi today, and he was cooking a Ekadashi food, and then he said, when we fast, we feast.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting. I guess it's feasting for the lordships, but we learn consistently, although it's the mood of within ISKCON that fasting means feasting. Actually, Vedically, fasting on Ekadashi should mean that it's almost nirjala if you can, gold standard. If not, then you take a little water. If not, then you take a little fruit. Like that, there's progressive standards of where you should sit. But here, Prabhupada himself is saying on days of fasting, we feast. So it just seemed contrary to how what we learn from sort of Vedic teachings compared to Prabhupada's mood here in terms of. Now, I understand, of course, he's feasting for the lordships. That's a different matter. But it appeared that he said we feast as opposed to the lordships feast. Okay.
I mean, one thing is that we have to understand what he meant. Of course, he did not expect us during his time. He didn't. Ekadashis were not where devotees are engaged whole day in cooking, like how we have a Prabhupada's appearance day or any other celebrations where we cook so many or even Janmashtami. Ekadashi is not meant to be a day like that. So my sense of it, when Prabhupada says, therefore devotees, there's only feasting. My understanding is the same as what Prabhupada speaks about Haridas Thakur, even though he's being whipped in different marketplaces, so he does not see it as suffering. Right? He thinks it as, I deserve this by the mercy of the Lord. He takes it as the mercy of the Lord. So we don't follow artificial austerities. Even on Ekadashi days, I mean, of course, not artificial. If someone is able to do it, which is very rare, those who can observe Nirjal, that's a rare category. And Prabhupada knew that. And so he permitted, as during Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's time also, that devotees who cannot fast fully, they're permitted to eat non-grain food. And prasadam, by its very definition, means mercy. So for us, the very sense of austerity is not there, because the sense of austerity is not there on Ekadashi, because we are honoring Krishna's mercy in the form of prasadam. So I think when I read it, my sense of it was, Prabhupada is referring to the fact that prasadam is Krishna's mercy. We don't not have prasadam on that day. Of course, I mean, Prabhupada did not, in this particular context, he was teaching a young woman, a very young woman, in fact, who had very little idea of Krishna consciousness. So he was trying to tell her that we don't practice austerity for the sake of austerity. We do what is needful. So if it means having some prasadam, we have it to keep the body and soul together. To not keep it. I mean, anyway, but you don't die by fasting, but to be able to focus the mind on Krishna. We do whatever is needed to focus the mind on Krishna. And if we had to cook in that context and offer to Krishna, we have the bhoga becomes prasadam. So it is mercy. So it is feast. Ultimately, every food that we eat is a feast. I took it in that sense when I read that. Because, I mean, ultimately what you see there is just Prabhupada just had made one item, which is simply wonderful. Nothing else, actually.
Thank you, Prabhuji. So another corollary question to this. Again, it's not directly Lila Mitra, but it's just kind of general path of Prabhupada, how we should learn from Prabhupada's teaching. So in many temples around the world have adopted different standards, for instance, on how to observe Vishnu Tattva fasting. I think in the UK, they break on grain on some temples because they said Prabhupada said we should break on grain. But actually, the Vedic standard is we don't break on grain, we're supposed to break on Ekadashi, on Vishnu Tattvas, etc. Should we follow the Suddha path where we can, or should we follow Prabhupada's standard for time, place, and circumstance if we know that the time, place, and circumstance have changed, and we should therefore try and follow a higher level of standard if we can? Or should we take the easy path, as many devotees do, to say, well, this is Prabhupada's standards, it doesn't hurt them if they can do something higher, we should do something higher, is what I was thinking.
I found that, it's a very good question. I have found that it's not very difficult to observe Ekadashi fasting because we have so many things available. Your quinoa, your buckwheat, you have so many different things to eat on Ekadashi. So we're not short of food on Ekadashi. So definitely, I think devotees can follow that standard. Now the question comes up, what about guests? I think guests should be served regular prasadam, whether it's Ekadashi or not Ekadashi or whatever. Because that's what we practitioners follow. But for the newcomers or people who are just visiting, then for them, they don't know the principle of fasting on different days and things like that. For them, when Janmashtami, Prabhupada observed some Janmashtamis with grains anyway. So we can adopt that practice for the newcomers. And sometimes there is this thing, like, for example, Ram Navami. Ram Navami is a very famous thing which has been discussed so many times in ISKCON, and even the Shastrik Advisory Council has come up with a paper on it. Prabhupada's every instruction on Ram Navami is fast till sunset. But however, I mean, all the different letters, wherever he speaks about it, he's speaking about fasting till sunset, even lectures. But in reality, Prabhupada practiced only till afternoon. So then the dilemma comes up, what are we supposed to do? Now, Prabhupada is not present on the planet. So we don't have the opportunity to ask him what we should do. Therefore, the safer path would be to follow the instruction that he gave. Now, the Shastric Advisory Council in their paper have said we should follow the precedent. I respectfully disagree with that, because if you start following the precedent, you are going to overturn so many of the written instructions. I can understand if one written instruction or two written instructions say that we can also have, we can only fast till afternoon. But so far I've seen every single instruction where Prabhupada is speaking about Ram Navami fasting, he's saying it's till sunset. But why did Prabhupada do only till afternoon? We don't know. But if there were to be a group of instructions, like some places he's saying that we have to follow fasting till sunset, and some places he says till noon, then we can actually take what did Prabhupada do. Prabhupada did this and he said this, okay, fine. The other part, why he said we don't know, we can say. But here we don't have the situation. We have a situation where Prabhupada is, as far as I know, if someone can correct me, if you can find me some evidence which shows that Prabhupada said that we can fast only till noon for Ram Navami, then we can take that as the, that's okay, that we can say, okay, Prabhupada followed that. But there's no such instruction from whatever I know of or whatever I've read. So then it becomes a dangerous precedent to say that what Prabhupada did is what we should follow. Rather, our path is we follow the instruction that he gave us. We don't have the facility to ask him why he did not follow it. So therefore, we have only, our mandate is what he has instructed us. So therefore, post-Prabhupada disappearance, we can't overturn his instructions with his precedent. This is my take on fasting in general. First of all, number one, even for Ram Navami, there's no problem. Prabhupada would have no problem with anybody fasting till sunset. The question is it enough to fast till the afternoon, till noon? Is it enough or not? We can't take Prabhupada's precedent as the concluding factor there, because all his instructions are different on that topic. So therefore, we have to be careful in these kind of situations.
Okay, thank you, Prabhuji. So the question was more philosophical, actually, than the matter of fasting. It was more a question of where Prabhupada has deviated from Shastra, written instructions that have come down, Parampara, etc. Is the precedent set by the Acharya that we're following, and that instruction should be our final guiding light, or should it be that we go back where in doubt? Go back to Shastra. So, like, for instance, you must not disobey the instructions of your spiritual master. This is not an instruction as such, but if there's guidelines set by your Acharya, which is deviating somewhat away from what the Sastric precedent is, do we follow the Acharya or do we follow the Sastric Pramand?
No, you see, usually what happens is that, first of all, we have to follow the Acharya, actually. We have to follow the Acharya. Now, that's where the thing comes up, because usually when the Acharya does something which is within quotes, apparent contradicting Shastra, he actually explains. For example, sannyasis are not forbidden to travel across the seas, because traveling across the seas are all done by businessmen and sense gratifiers. What is sannyasi's business traveling across the seas? It's generally forbidden. But Prabhupada explains, but we have to do it for preaching. So that principle of preaching overtakes that Shastric injunction. Otherwise, it will become niyamagraha, too much attached to rules and regulations. Because all rules and regulations are meant to serve Krishna. So one who knows to serve Krishna knows also how to apply the rules and regulations. That is the point. That they understand how all the rules and regulations are meant to satisfy Krishna. So that would be my answer to that question.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu. On that particular instance,
by definition would not
deviation of the Acharya is different to the deviation of his followers. I think the Acharya is a pure soul, so he's almost licensed to do as he feels appropriate time, place, and circumstance. But the followers should not imitate that, no?
Yeah, at the same time, see, one thing is that we need to understand that, first of all, Prabhupada or a pure devotee, any pure devotee for that matter, there is no, they do not contradict Shastra. There's no question about them contradicting Shastra. So if we find some apparent contradiction, like for example, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, everything is carried out by the three modes of material nature. Everything he says, literally, very strongly. But later on he says there are 5 factors of action. So this is the very nature of Vedic language and Vedic discourse, that something is spoken very strongly, almost in absolute sense, just for emphasis. For example, Prabhupada says, where is that woman scientist? Show me even one. This is how people in the Vedic times talked anyway. Because I know my grandfather, he was also from Prabhupada's time, right? So he would speak like this. But I know that he doesn't literally mean it. Because this is the very nature of speaking with emphasis. So sometimes people take Prabhupada literally there and says, oh, but we had Madame Curie, so Prabhupada is wrong. But if you understand the context of what he's speaking, even Vedic language, for example, it is very strongly prescribed. You cannot touch the stool of an animal. If you touch the stool of an animal, you'll take bath. But then Kaudanga is an exception. So, but if you read the instruction about you should not touch, you will not figure out about Kaudang there. Kaudang appears somewhere else. So the acharyas know how exactly Shastra is to be read. We don't know. We don't know how Shastra is to be read. That is why we need acharya. We cannot touch Shastra directly. We cannot read Shastra directly. We have to read Shastra through the acharyas. Because Shastra is God. How can someone who is not pure touch something which is pure? So we can only access something which is pure through the pure, which is the pure devotees. So we can access the pure only through the pure devotees. So Acharya's interpretation of Shastra is fully in line with Shastra. It can never be out of line with Shastra. So when we say he adjusted, it generally means that he adjusted, not that he bent Shastra, but he adjusted what was traditionally known. He adjusted what was traditionally known, that's all. Not that you don't find what he did in the Shastra. No. What was traditionally known, he adjusted, that's all.
An example is, for instance, I find a little confusing, just because I'm a little ignorant and a little, sort of unlearned in this area. Not little, very unlearned, I should say. For instance, Prabhupada set out the 10 offenses. And one of those offenses is we should not preach to those who are faithless, as is Krishna's instructions in the Gita as well, that we should not give this knowledge to those who are not believers. Yet we go out there day in, day out, and the whole cornerstone and foundation of this movement is to go out onto the street and preach. And we don't know who's faithless and who's not faithless. I mean, we are touching anyone on the street. Most likely is 50-50 are faithless, yet we're still going out and preaching. So if that adjustment was there, why keep that one of those offenses, knowing that we're preaching that offense daily, one way or the other?
Yeah, what that instruction means, that's first of all we need to understand what that instruction means. That instruction means that what a Madhyam Adhikari does, that he ignores those who are envious. But unless you make an attempt, you would not know who is friendly, who is envious. That is what we're doing, So that is not in contradiction to that instruction. What is if we know that a certain person is envious, and if we shall continue to keep on doing it, that is what is called offensive. And that is what is called, that is not what is recommended. Offensive, of course. So what is forbidden is not approaching people. What is forbidden is to keep engaging with people who are envious. One should identify who's envious, who's not envious. Because without preaching, you cannot know who's envious, who's not envious. How do we know? So when we preach, we know, okay, this person is envious, this person is not envious. So someone who's envious, we neglect them. That's it. We are not going to be dealing with them.
Thank you, Prabhu.
No, I mean, of course, in a general sense, everybody is demoniac. We are living in a demonic civilization. But in this particular sense, when they're saying that we should not preach to the faithless, it refers to people who are, like Prabhupada said, there are two kinds of people. One is the person who's asleep and the person who's pretending to be asleep. And he says that you can never wake up a person who's pretending to be asleep. You can only wake up a person who's asleep. So unless we go out into the world and try to give out this message, we'll not even know who's asleep, who's pretending to be asleep. Both of them are demoniac. Everybody is demoniac. Whoever is interested in material life is demoniac. There's no doubt in that. But one grade of demoniac people can be saved. The other kind of demoniac people have to be ignored. I mean, of course, demoniac proper defines what is the difference between a demon and a demigod. Proper says demigods also are interested in material enjoyment. The very fact that someone is interested in material enjoyment does not make them a demon. So those who are interested in material enjoyment and who want to get that material enjoyment by following the codes of God are called demigods. But those who want to achieve material enjoyment without following the codes of God are called the demons. That's what it is. So those are trying to enjoy without trying to follow the codes of God are demons. But they're among the demons. There is a chance, okay, you tell them, look, don't do this. This is not good for you. They may listen. What you're doing is demoniac. Don't do this. Don't try to go against God's order. They'll say they may think God does not exist or whatever. If you try to prove to them actually God exists and try to give them reason and argument and whatever from scripture, then they may accept. So even among the demoniac, there are different categories. There are people who can be redeemed and people who cannot be redeemed. I mean, cannot be redeemed means, I'm not saying in an absolute sense, but who are at least displaying that until they, by some mercy, they turn around.
I'm done, yeah.
Prabhuji, shall I ask you something?
Shailesh Prabhu, is it okay? Or Shailesh
Absolutely.
Prabhu,
Yes, Prabhuji. Absolutely. That's very, very sorry for engaging you for so long on this.
No, I'm fine. This is what we're supposed to do. We discuss Krishna Katha. Yes, Mataji.
Prabhuji, regarding this now, we were talking about Ram Navami and other festivals. And there is another trend. I don't know where it is, means whether it is there in all the places or no. Like in all the Vishnu Tattva appearance day and all, we have to take non-green prasadam. That is taking trend now. Is it like?
No, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong in that. That's what I said. There is nothing wrong in observing Vishnu Tattva expansions with with non-green. There's no problem with that. There's no restriction against that, right? We should consider that. So there's nothing wrong in that.
Yeah, but it is not considered as wrong, Prabhuji, because they are telling us that we really should not take grain prasadam at all.
No.
Yeah, that is what has been now they are telling in the temples. They are telling that on all Vishnu Tattva, this one you should take only non-grain prasadam. They are like insisting on those things.
No, that I think is a bit too much, because Prabhupada, if he has given instruction that we should not take non-grain, then we are considered that we should have only non-grain. Then we should take that seriously. But we don't find that instruction anywhere.
But it has been past couple of years in our temples and all that, they are really making it very this one.
Okay, but my point is, it doesn't matter, Mataji. How does it matter? This is, I mean, we can still follow that, right?
Okay.
What's wrong in that?
That's not wrong. Yeah,
there's nothing wrong. We can follow it. That's why for me, this is not an important thing, because even if they make it mandatory, so what?
Okay.
They may not be doing it necessarily in the sense of that they know better than Prabhupada, but they may just be trying to follow a standard which Prabhupada also would have no problem with.
Okay.
But as I said, for the guests, whatever it is, we should serve them regular prasadam, not non-grains. People cannot, people cannot handle all these kind of things that we do sometimes. Like they don't know what it means, like to have sabudana, khichdi, and all those things. I mean, they may be expecting rice. They give them rice. That's all. As far as devotees are concerned, we have no problem for following non-grain also, right? Why should we protest against that?
Yeah, but it is the same thing has been even served to the guests also, Prabhuji.
Yeah,
In
but
many
anyway,
places
what
it's
can you
given.
do? It ultimately is between them and Prabhupada. You
Yes.
can't do much about it, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
Prabhu. Yes, Prabhu.
Prabhu Harishna.
Yes, Manju. Yes, Prabhuji.
Yeah, Prabhu, actually it's in this regard, actually, I was about to ask. Actually, one of the Ritvik devotee, I never knew he was a Ritvik devotee. So he was saying that Prabhupada's teachings or his instructions are not uniformly followed across various centers. And they do according to what they understand or what they interpret. How far is it true?
Including the Ritviks, huh? Including the Ritviks, by the way.
Exactly, including the Ritviks. Obviously, the Ritviks are totally different, which we can't accept. But is this true, Prabhu? Is his statement true?
Yeah, that definitely is true. Prabhupada's instructions are not uniformly followed in our movement. It's a fact.
So is that acceptable, Prabhu? Is it okay?
It's not. It's not. It's not. It's not. It's not. Now the question is that okay, there are many details. What is being followed? What is not being followed? There are so many details there. But yeah, which is we. I mean, which deals on. But I mean, like we can't generally address it in as wholesale in this kind of manner. We can't address it generically like this. It has to be okay. What particular instruction is not being followed uniformly? Then we see. Then we try to see why it is happening.
Okay, Prabhu. Fine, Prabhu. And one more thing is like, there was we read across this Haridas
See, one
Thakur's.
thing, okay, let me put it like this. So far, by Krishna's grace or whatever, we have not come to a situation where anyone has tried to tamper with the morning program. That's not happened so far. Every temple, I've never temple congregation, wherever I've seen, nobody has tried to tamper with the morning program. So that has not happened. So that is like, I don't know how to put it. If that happens, then that's very dangerous. But so far, that has not happened. There are other things which I think can be addressed and solved. But we don't have a what do you say life and death crisis in terms of if things like morning program and things like that were affected, then that would be very, very dangerous.
Prabhuji, I heard, I don't know, I have not seen or anything, but I heard from a devotee that in some temple, I don't know where it is and all, I don't know whether it is a rumor or true. They said that in some place they are doing Guru Puja first before the Shangara Aarti. I heard it, that's all, Prabhuji. From one devotee.
See, my point is, I don't know if Prabhupada was so insistent on the order of how do you do things. Like sometimes some temples have Bhagavatam class at 5 o'clock in the morning because people have to go for work or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but all the elements of the program should be there. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes there may be some flexibility to shift the order, but not the element of the program. You cannot not have Tulsi Puja, for example. You cannot not have Prabhupada Guru Puja. You cannot stop it. But how you, I mean, there could be some flexibility depending on temple circumstances to change, I mean, to tweak the order a bit. That's all.
Prabhu, what I was asking is like this Haridas Thakur's pastime which Prabhupada is reading out. Prabhu, is there incidences like that which has happened during Prabhupada's times? If something is there, if you can let us know during next class, Prabhu. Within the devotees, I'm saying.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are several instances. Devotees got arrested and put into jails for distributing. You're asking whether they got beaten up like that?
Yeah, beaten up or extreme cases, I'm saying. Yeah, whether it is jail or beaten up.
We had one of our sannyasis who lost his leg, right? When the dacoits men shot. Bhaktiragha Maharaj lost his leg by the bullet wound.
Which country?
That happened after Prabhupada's disappearance.
In India?
But in India, in Mayapur.
Oh, okay.
After that, they installed Narasimhadev and then dacoits vanished. So we did have a situation like that. But of course, even in what is that place? In Europe, there was one place, Armenia or somewhere, where our devotees were very badly beaten up. And during Prabhupada's time, Mayapur, there was a riot, but nobody got injured actually. But Bhavananda Prabhu, I think, had to go to jail at that time. There was
Kazakhstan, Prabhuji.
Pardon?
Incident was in Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan, yeah, correct. Kazakhstan. Was it Kazakhstan? No, Prabhuji. That they shut down the temple, right? But they didn't get beaten up.
They were being beaten up outside as well.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
it was quite a nasty situation.
Oh yeah, I mean, Prabhu, I mean, what's it? This in Bombay, devotees go where, I mean, that Mataji was dragged on the floor with her head, with her hair, Vaibhavi Mataji. And I mean, when they tried to destroy Radha Rasa Vihari's shed, these Mr. Nayar's, and I mean, there's a whole Mahatre, and there's a whole group of people.
During Prabhupada's time, Prabhu?
This is Prabhupada's time, yes. When Prabhupada heard, Ali, she was the pujari, and she tried to defend the deities, to defend the deity shed being demolished during Prabhupada's time. And this is Mumbai. And then they pulled her by the hair and dragged her on the floor, across the floor, to take her out of that place. And then, but she would not still give up. She used her legs. When she couldn't use her hands were held. So then she began to use her legs and began to kick the people who were trying to drag her away. And when Prabhupada heard this, he said that she will go back, she will kick her way back to Godhead. She'll go back to be Godhead by kicking. So Prabhupada is very proud of it. So there were some instances like that where devotees did get, and I also think that the Hells Angels also broken in some temples in America. The Hells Angels, we're studying about them now. There were some incidents of violence.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to hear that. Thank you, Prabhu. Anyway, thanks for sharing this, Prabhu.
Correct. Any other? It's 5:30, so those who want to leave could leave. If there are any other questions or comments or reflections, we could. So now Shailesh, go in the. We are consistently having about 20. Now this is between we are 31.
These were great. Unfortunately, I'm logged in twice as well, so I'm I'm trying to boost our numbers a little bit. My wife is listening on a different, so there's a little bit of feedback. Apologies.
Transcendental rigging.
Just a little bit of an enhancement to the point you made earlier. I think you mentioned guests should be served non-Ekadashi if they arrive in. Let me just turn one of the devices off. Give me a second.
Yeah.
So is that better? I was getting feedback there. Apologies, because we were both logged in. Yeah, so my wife's suggestion in those sort of instances is where we have guests. I think it's a really good opportunity to serve them Ekadashi, but they serve them in a feast-like manner, so they're not missing out. There's no austerity there, but they get introduced to the fact that, look, this is this is what Ekadashi is about. We fast, but it doesn't necessarily mean to say you're missing out on anything. So it's an opportunity where you can turn, rather than ducking the issue altogether, you can turn the issue into an opportunity to preach by serving them an Ekadashi feast.
That's correct.
But I think sastrically, isn't there a problem that if on Ekadashi we also serve grain? There is a breach of one of the
no. Because Bhakti Sastri Thakur, when the Gaudiya Math devotees were sleeping on Ekadashi, I don't know whether he actually did it or not, but he asked the khichdi to be cooked. So I asked them to feed them khichdi and go and distribute.
That's because they were about to travel, and therefore they would have had they would not be able to do their. So, but that was an exception rather than the rule, because that was specifically for giving them sufficient nutrition so they can do their duty. So that was the instance there, I think.
No, the point is we can't force someone who doesn't want to do it, right? For example, in Bombay, you can see Prabhupada in that I Build Your Temple. Prabhupada even allowed tea to be served in the guest houses to the visiting guests. Forget about what's a tea. And I mean, I have a practical experience of this. I remember this is on Jayaprakash Maharaj, my spiritual master's gas puja. It's on Ekadashi. So my father-in-law, although it was a very grand feast, Ekadashi feast, he just refused to eat. He didn't eat. That's all. So I mean, there are always going to be people who will not have it. That's it, because it just doesn't suit them. They need rice or they need something like that. So I think we can have the Ekadashi option, but you should also have the non-Ekadashi option for guests, because they're coming to Krishna's house, They are not coming to follow our rules. They're just coming to worship Krishna. So we should make it possible for them to worship Krishna. So that's what I think should be the underlying principle, that it's our duty to host people, and generally when you host people, you feed them according to their taste, right? I mean, according to the taste means not like the specific individual taste, but then hosting a guest means satisfying them, right? And they guests to Krishna's temple.
So if the guest wants a drink, what do we do?
Pardon?
If the guests want to come to Govinda's and want a drink of alcoholic beverage, what do we do?
Not in Govinda's. Not in, that is, they're bringing some alcoholic beverage, right? Which is against our principles, right?
But so is tea, no? Tea is an intoxicant.
Like, for example,
not severe, but it's still...
Yes. Prabhupada did not allow it to be had everywhere. In Bombay guest house, he said for our life members, we can provide tea to them in their rooms. He didn't say that you can have it anywhere in the campus. In their rooms. So this is there in that. I've heard this before, but then when I read this, I build you a temple. Giriraj Maharaj also brings up that point, because they specifically asked Prabhupada, what do we do with our life members who need tea? So Prabhupada says we can serve them in our guest house. So in Juhu, now the question could have, can this be applicable to Mayapur Vrindavan? I don't know. But at least Juhu clearly said it. So see, there are some things which are, I don't know how about it, like non-vegetarian is sinful. I mean, it's like killing an animal. Those kind of things Prabhupada would not, whatever guests would say. But there are some things which are within, as they say, Prabhupada would flex within bounds. So what the bounds are, only the pure devotee would know. Now, for example, a guest coming to a temple, even in Prabhupada's Samadhi, in Mayapur, on Ekadashi, they offer grains. They don't offer him non-grains, because he is not a resident of this material world who has to follow the rules. He's already passed on to Goloka Vrindavan. So you offer him, he's not bound by the rules of Ekadashi. So in Prabhupada Samadhi, they offer him regular grain. The deities are offered grain. So this is prasadam. Somebody has to honor that food, right? It cannot be thrown away. Somebody has to honor that food. So it is not sinful. First of all, the Lord is having the food. The Lord has no Ekadashi. The Lord can, so you can make prasadam even on a Ekadashi day, because the Lord will honor it. Now, we are not supposed to follow it as practitioners, right? We don't even insist that, at least as practitioners who have taken vows, we cannot follow it. We're not supposed to break it. We're supposed to follow it. We're not supposed to break it. But others have not taken that vow. At the very least, I could say you could have both options. So let them choose. They don't come to our temple and go away without eating anything.
Okay, so I'm testing the limits here, Prabhuji. You forgive me, I'm playing devil's advocate here. I'm not going to name names here, but we have an incident here. There was some devotees that started a restaurant here, under sort of the guise of trying to promote sattvic foods, etc. It's sheltered under a charitable trust favorable to ISKCON, not directly under ISKCON. Okay. The restaurant wasn't doing so well, so they've now decided to serve alcohol within the restaurant. I'm fervently against that, because it breaks, I think, all boundaries, in my opinion, where there's a way you draw a line. But they're saying it still draws people in, and we can still preach by this, because without doing that, we're not going to be able to draw people in. And so I challenged them. I said, where is the praman for this? I said, they've asked a number of sannyasis, and they've said it should be okay. And they're saying that even Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wouldn't have a problem with this. I found that gobsmackingly outrageous, frankly. I couldn't tolerate it. But maybe I'm in the minority. Maybe I'm a fool for saying these things. But so where such, my problem with this stuff is that when you start bending the rules, people don't know where the line lies.
Yeah. That's correct.
Right,
that's
and
correct.
They just push it. Then the next step is, okay, you encourage people by serving meat, because at least you can preach.
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you can go to a nightclub and preach there. Yeah,
Correct.
where do you draw the line?
Correct. So, I mean, this is correct. So, I mean, I once asked Gopi Parandan Prabhu this question, when he was present on the planet, and he gave an answer which was fully convincing, which makes perfect sense. So he said, there is something that ISKCON as an institution with ISKCON's funds can do, which is only what Prabhupada has prescribed to be done. Anything else, congregational members can do. For example, in Bombay, you have the Bhaktivinoda Hospital. That's run by the congregational devotees, the devotee doctors. Devotees can decide to get together to have a mall or whatever they want, they can do. But ISKCON cannot do it. ISKCON cannot do it because Prabhupada has very specifically said what ISKCON can do. ISKCON cannot open a whatever. Yeah, I mean, in general, I'm not talking about you, the example that you gave. In general, ISKCON should stick with the practices and things which Prabhupada has given. ISKCON cannot afford to do all these kind of things. But whereas ISKCON members, in the sense that, okay, who have their own independent source of income, they can do, for example, for their business, they can have a restaurant or like this, as you're saying, whatever they want, they can do, because ultimately the aim there is to make money to serve Krishna. They're running a business. In the process, they can also try to make, serve devotees or, serve the people in the world by giving them some sattvic food or whatever. That's a secondary thing. The primary thing is it's a business, and business is meant to, the money from the business is meant to serve Krishna. So congregational members can do it. But whereas ISKCON is very clearly, what ISKCON can do, what it cannot do is very clearly defined by Prabhupada. I mean, at least not in writing in the sense that every single detail is, laid it out. But we understand this, what is it? How we wanted everything to be like how Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur had. If you're writing, the book should contain how many times the word Krishna is used. Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur used to judge that, by whether the book is good enough or not. Like that. So there are some things which ISKCON cannot do. But whereas congregational members can do, like I remember there are some programs where they're feeding the masses and they're feeding the poor. Somebody can set up that as a business and do it. They can earn money, they can serve Krishna in the process. So many people can also be involved in that. So many devotees can be involved. All that is fine. But ISKCON cannot do it. People have dedicated their lives to ISKCON as monks, brahmacharis, or who are dependent exclusively on ISKCON for their income. They cannot do these kind of things. Shailesh, I don't know if I made it more complicated or not. I think.
Yeah. I mean,
I
personally, I think every devotee represents ISKCON and Prabhupada. Every devotee should be principled enough to follow.
No.
We are all ambassadors for Srila Prabhupada's movement, Prabhuji.
No. There is a difference. When you collect money from the public, that is Krishna's money. That's Krishna's money. You have no right to touch it in any manner. That is different from what the pure devotee has said. That is the difference between ISKCON. ISKCON member, it is your money which you have to engage in Krishna's service. Of course, ultimately say everything is Krishna's money. But that money has not been earned through charity or for ISKCON. You've done it on your personal accord, you earned some money. You can do whatever you want with it. But there's a difference between that and ISKCON's money. ISKCON's money, people are donating it for a certain reason. Right?
Okay, so this instance was a charity. So it should not be done. Therefore, it's a charity effectively run by a number of devotees for the purpose of propagating ISKCON's message.
Fine, ISKCON devotees can run charity also, right? But is it? Are they temple dependent? Temple dependent means 100%. They don't have bank accounts. They have nothing. They're fully dependent on ISKCON. This is called an ISKCON devotee. I mean, in the classical sense. Like during Prabhupada's time, individual devotees did not have bank accounts and all that. Everything was managed by the temple. People would give up their whole earnings and join the temple. That is the classic definition of what an ISKCON devotee is. I'm not talking about people who are financially independent or who can do some things like this. But how are they living? That's very important.
I think it's a gray area. Okay, I'll give you
There
that.
is, I agree. There is a gray area. There is
Principally, I fundamentally disagree that if you are an ISKCON devotee, there are numerous ways of making money. You do not need to break regulatory principles in order to make money, right? There is many ways of earning money. That's an absolute cop-out to say, I need to earn money for Krishna service, so I'm going to break a regulatory principle. I think that's complete cop-out.
No, I'm not talking about regulative principles. I'm not talking regulative principles. For example, Prabhupada said
selling alcohol is a regulative principle. Yes.
Pardon?
Selling alcohol is a breach of regulatory
I didn't hear. Did you say the restaurant serves alcohol? I didn't hear that.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I'm really sorry. I didn't hear that part of it. Yeah. You cannot. Yeah, that's correct. Whether you're a devotee or a devotee who's fully dependent on the temple or not, you cannot break.
I thought you were fighting for their cause and saying if they're independent, that's fine. I mean, I was gobsmacked. I was kind of. I was going to find out of the group on principle, Prabhuji.
Okay. Sorry.
No, I wouldn't.
No, first of all, that principle of Sarva Dharman Pariteja is applicable to all devotees, whether they are congregational members or those who are exclusively depend on ISKCON. Okay. Now, to come to the platform of Sarva Dharman Pariteja, first of all, you have to give up Ardharma. Otherwise, there's no meaning of Sarva Dharman. How are we even qualified to give up Dharma if we are not given up Adharma? So for devotee, Adharma is out of question. There's no question about it. Whether you're a congregational member or whatever it may be, you cannot serve alcohol. You cannot break regulative principles. Absolutely. Whatever it is. So, what do you call it? Unless a pure devotee instructs. Pure devotee means like Prabhupada, self-illuminating. That's a different thing. Like Bhaktisiddhanta Sai Thakur served meat to that governor who came. He can do it. He's a pure devotee. But we have not been instructed to do it. So anyway, that invoking Bhaktisiddhanta Sai Thakur, which means that you have the mind to understand what is Bhaktisiddhanta Sai Thakur, you have the same adhikar. That's ridiculous unless you've been instructed to do that. Yes, I mean, absolutely. There's a question of devotees doing anything, even which is seemingly sinful. There's no question about it. Yeah, I agree with you fully. Whether congregation members or this thing. Sorry, I didn't hear that part about serving alcohol. I only heard about sattvic foods and all that. I didn't hear about alcohol.
That was the whole crux of the conversation, probably. Thank you again, Pat. Thank you for engaging.
Sure. I mean, it's ironic that even we have to have a discussion on that point. It's ridiculous. It's like, I mean, in the sense that, I mean, the fact that we have come to a situation where we even have to discuss that something like this is going on. Is it right, wrong, or how can it even happen? That's. I mean, I agree with you. That's just completely unbelievable. Okay, so I think we'll close for today. We had a nice discussion today. Thank you, Shailesh Prabhu. You always stimulate discussions in very interesting directions.
My humble obeisance to all the Vaishnavas, and please forgive me for always opening my mouth more so than I should. So please forgive me.
Your presence makes the whole class exciting. Don't worry. I'm sure
it's a very nice way of spinning.
I'm sure. Just like I look forward to your questions, I'm sure there are other members in the audience who are looking forward to hear your questions and thoughts.
You're too generous, Prabhuji. Thank you.
No, I mean, hearing Shailesh's question gives us all doubts to be cleared.
You see, there you have it. Okay. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripasintu bevicha paritanam